Hi there, my name is Cal Truman, and I am the Education and Careers Coordinator for New Yorkers for Clean Power. Thank you for watching our Green the Grid and Electrify Everything presentation. We've broken it down into several separate videos so you can watch one at a time instead of having to commit to a full hour, which can be hard to do. So in this first section, I will introduce the program and walk you through some of the problems with fossil fuels. In the subsequent bits of the presentation, we'll talk about New York State's climate goals and how we're going to reach them, broken down into sectors like transportation, buildings, and the energy sector. And we'll end the presentation with some ways that individuals and organizations and municipalities can get involved, help accelerate this transition, and move our state in an environmentally and climate-friendly direction. So thank you for joining. Let me share my screen. Here we are. So green the grid and electrify everything. We'll talk about where that name comes from. First of all, so New Yorkers for Clean Power is a statewide collaborative campaign to rapidly shift to a clean energy economy. Through education, advocacy, and organizing, the campaign encourages local governments, businesses, and the public to advance a range of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and clean transportation solutions. We'll start with a few important terms. And if you forget any of these definitions, or if I use any other term you don't understand, if this were a live presentation, I'd encourage you to just let me know so I can remind you, but feel free to come back to this slide if you need to. There's no silly questions, there's a lot of jargon, and I don't want anyone to come away not understanding, so I'm happy to clarify. So greenhouse gas emissions refer to carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, and other gases that trap heat in the atmosphere and prevent it from drifting back into space. So the sun sends energy to the earth, it gets stored here as heat. Greenhouse gases are what keep the earth warm enough for life. But if you have too much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it can get too warm for life. So we have to stay right in that comfortable zone. So emissions refers to those gases being released into the atmosphere around the planet. Net zero means releasing no more greenhouse gases than are being sequestered or stored. So when we talk about net zero, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not sending any of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It means that any that are being sent out have to be counteracted by pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, which is difficult. So we'll get into that. Mostly we need to stop emitting because pulling them out is really hard. Renewable energy is any kind of energy that's collected from resources that naturally replenish on a human timescale. This includes solar, which is energy from the sun, wind energy, and hydropower, which is energy from water, whether that's the waves or rivers. And then the electric grid is the power lines and other infrastructure, which is used to supply and move energy around a region. So the electric grid is how the energy from a power plant gets to your house, but it's also the way that electricity from, let's say, solar panels on your roof might be able to flow to somebody else's house. We'll talk more about that too. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the problems with fossil fuels, and that will be the focus of this portion of the presentation. Here we're including not only oil, coal, and natural gas, which you see pictured, but also things like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Powering our lives and economy with fossil fuels has had a lot of unintended consequences. So when we talk about clean energy, we're also talking about getting away from the problems with our current system. You got to keep in mind that doing nothing is also a choice to keep causing these harms. There's no perfect energy system, but we can definitely do better than we're doing right now. So there are only a couple of graphs in the presentation, I promise. There's like 4. It's not going to be all graphs. This is the first one. Climate change is an urgent incentive to stop burning fossil fuels. So this graph runs from the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution kicked off a really fast transition to using fossil fuels, like for trains and factories, up until roughly today. So the colored bars show the annual average temperature, how hot or cold was it that year on average. And the line shows the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So those greenhouse gases, that's one of them that warms up the planet. So it works like a blanket in the atmosphere as a quick refresher. Having any greenhouse gases is not the problem. The problem is that burning fossil fuels releases so much carbon dioxide so quickly that it far outpaces the natural world's ability to reabsorb it. And so these like blankets around the earth are piling on and we're overheating. So that's what we're looking at here with this graph. It's the relationship between rapidly adding more and more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and the rise of annual average temperatures on the planet. We can't keep burning fossil fuels without locking in further dangerous warming of the planet. And even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, sometimes, the higher temperatures and the extreme weather, it could get worse before it gets better. So the best advice I've heard is when you're in a hole, stop digging. We urgently need a transition as fast as we had during the Industrial Revolution away from fossil fuels. So this is sort of the climate basis. We're getting cooked here. That's not good. We also got a couple of photos here of some extreme weather events that were related to climate change and their impacts in New York State. So this photo is haze from Oregon wildfire smoke in New York City in 2021. So over the summer, the wildfires in Oregon were so bad, we could see the haze from the smoke from New York City. There's a Statue of Liberty. And then here is flooding from Hurricane Irene in Windham, New York in 2011. And this kind of extreme weather is getting worse as global temperatures rise, as are the deaths, health issues, property damages, and costs associated with extreme weather. Mining, transporting, and burning fossil fuels all impact the environment beyond just the climate. So this can include heavy metal contamination in waterways, acid rain from smokestacks on power plants, and oil spill damage to coastal habitats. So cleaning up these environmental damages costs money. And, even before you have to clean it up, it affects all sorts of living things, including people. And speaking of money, generally speaking, folks who promote fossil fuels know that these environmental issues exist, but they frame them as necessary for economic reasons. So setting aside the rising costs of the climate and environmental damages, it is not at all clear that extraction industries provide the promised jobs and local benefits. So when people talk about drilling or mining for these fossil fuels, they say it will bring jobs, it will revitalize the area, it will be great for the economy, and that doesn't show in the research. So we're going to go into that for 2 seconds here. So New York State banned gas drilling in 2014. So we don't drill for natural gas in New York State. And the reasons for that included local health impacts, drinking water contamination, seismic activity, which means earthquakes, climate change, and soil contamination. But we didn't ban burning gas, we just banned drilling for it. So we asked our neighbors in Pennsylvania, mostly, to enjoy the health impacts, contamination, and earthquakes as they drill our gas instead. So this map is pretty far out of date. Unfortunately, it hasn't been updated, but it does show a relationship between coal mining and local poverty rates. Fortunately, the coal industry has waned over the past 20 years, which will give these regions and their economies a chance to redirect and recover. I spent a year in Appalachia working in places with abandoned coal mines and super polluted water. So if you ever want to talk about that, you just drop me a line. I've got photos of the rivers. They looked awful. We also have more recent studies about the economic damages caused by resource extraction industries like drilling, like mining. And then we can also look to the subsidies that fossil fuel industries receive. In 2021, the US Treasury estimated that limiting subsidies for fossil fuel companies would boost government tax receipts by more than $35 billion in the coming decade. I don't know about you, but I feel like there may be other ways we could be spending those billions of dollars rather than cooking the planet. So finally, let's look at the health impacts. So we've established that digging up, transporting, and burning fossil fuels pollutes the land, air, and water. This pollution particularly affects the people living near infrastructure like pipelines and power plants. And in the US, these people tend to be poor and disproportionately people of color. So health conditions linked to fossil fuel pollution include emphysema, chronic bronchitis, premature birth and birth defects, stroke, cancer, asthma, nerve damage, damage to the liver, the kidneys, and children and the elderly are especially vulnerable. So what we're talking about here is deciding that we're going to base our whole economy on these polluting products that we're outsourcing the impact of those to brown babies and brown elders, which is a decision that we just sort of made as a society. But we can decide also to stop doing that. And the good news is that when we decide to fix this, it can work fast. So researchers in Kentucky, for example, found that as coal-fired power plants shut down or installed pollution controls, even if they just started sending out less pollution, the asthma symptoms in the surrounding areas dropped immediately, including inhaler use in the schools in the surrounding area. So working quickly to transition off of fossil fuels will make an immediate difference in people's lives and health, especially children and elders of color, and people living in poverty anywhere in the United States. I don't think it's fair to make this poor people's problem. So I've got a scary graph next. Are you ready? This is just to reiterate the scope of the problem, and this graph is from NASA. Carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, it traps heat. It is a direct chemical relationship that works the same in a test tube as it does in the sky. For over 800,000 years, this is what we're looking at, not 8,000 years, 800,000 years, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere remained within a range that we have only very recently vastly exceeded. So we're way up here. This hasn't happened in 800,000 years. On a geological timescale, we should right now be entering a period of global cooling. Instead, the 2010s were the hottest decade ever recorded, and 2020 set a new heat record. The industrialized world needs to stop emitting greenhouse gases and start drawing the excess out of the atmosphere immediately. Like, we are out of time. And that is what this graph is showing. We gotta get out of here. This is the danger zone. So this is the first portion of the Green the Grid and Electrify Everything presentation. We've gone through the bummers. We're gonna get into the cool stuff next. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you tune into the next section as well. And if you have any questions and you'd like to see my citations, I do have citations for all of the facts that I've mentioned. Please feel free to reach out, and I can link you to any journals or articles that I referenced in my work. Thank you so much.